Ah, wait, like this.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. Thanks. Thanks, and sorry for the delay in starting. We had some technical issues. Thanks to the ones that are here in the room, and thanks to the one connecting online. Um, well, as you know, the presentation today is from a visitor that we have, thanks to this Severo Ochoa grant. This is a program for exchange between different institutions, and this time we got the visit of Andrew Cox from the UK Met Office. Andrew is working in the knowledge communication team at the Met Office, and this was very nice for us because at BSc we also have a knowledge integration team. And although knowledge integration is not a formal discipline, we were discussing together and we were saying that it has more and more people now working on this field. And our aim is to make it more official. So it's we consider that it was a good opportunity to exchange ways of working, also to get to know the Met Office team, because of course we are collaborating in the framework of a lot of projects, but not with this team particularly. So he will present the work he's doing together with his team at Met Office, and please feel free to ask lots of questions. One difference with the BSc is that they have an advisory role for the government, for the UK government, something that we are not working that much on that. And perhaps also it will benefit us to see this other perspective. So Andrew, when you want, please feel free to start the presentation.
Vale, gracias, Walter. Hi everyone. I'm Andrew. Nice to be chatting to some of you already. So thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about knowledge integration at the Met Office, which is where I come from to you here today. So I've organised the presentation into 3 parts roughly. So I'll give a really high-level overview of the Met Office itself and the sort of science that goes on there. I'll then delve into something called the Hadley Centre Climate Programme, which is the work programme that funds the vast majority of the climate science that happens at the Met Office, and then also funds most of the activities that go on in the knowledge integration team. And then I'll look at the knowledge integration team more specifically, touching quite heavily on the relationship that we have with UK government. So the key departments in UK government, how we work with them to make sure, how we work with both them and scientists at the Met Office and more widely to ensure that the latest climate science is communicated effectively for policy making, both in the UK and at a sort of regional and international level. So apologies, I'm going to have to reach down and skip through the slides on a fairly regular basis, if it works. Give me 1 second. Right. Sweet. Okay. So the Met Office, this is what it looks like from the outside. It is, for any of you who haven't been there, I know, Andrea, you've had the pleasure of being before. So it's not based in London, surprisingly. It's based in Exeter, which is in the southwest of the UK. Not all great things are in London. And there's around 2,000 staff who are employed by it, around sort of 50 locations worldwide, but the vast majority are based at headquarters here, which is in Exeter. There's also a smaller office up in Aberdeen in Scotland, but there's only a couple of hundred people who are there. It's not all about weather forecasting and climate research, which is what most people assume. In fact, most people just assume that all we do is talk about the weather. But we also do things like technology. There's also commercial and government business that goes on, which is not related to weather or climate science. And then we've also got lots of corporate services there. So like marketing, we've got our own legal team, design team, things like that. Went back. Well, I should also say, I think I have no idea how long this is going to last for, but I'm assuming probably about half an hour. So if at any point there's anything that's unclear or you just got a question about something, just put your hand up and ask me, and I'll do my best to answer. Or if you prefer, we can just save till the end, because I think we should have plenty of time. So moving on from the Met Office as a whole, and then looking at the part of the Met Office where all the climate science happens. So this happens in a place called the Met Office Hadley Centre. This was opened in 1990, and it's dedicated to researching the Earth's climate. So it's all about both climate science research and delivering services related to climate change. So all of the climate research that goes on in the Met Office happens in the Met Office Hadley Centre. And what it does is it aims to provide climate science and services to people and organisations so that they can make better decisions to stay safe and thrive. And that's kind of, stay safe and thrive is a bit like the Met Office's unofficial motto. So they try to get it into literally everything. So the Hadley Centre does this by working with partners both in the UK and internationally. And since it opened in 1990, it's had some pretty decent scientific impact. So as of last count, I think this was either early in the year or at the start of the most recent climate programme, which was 2024. Nearly 3,500 papers have been published in peer-reviewed journals that included scientists at the Hadley Centre, co-authored with over 1,700 institutions from 140 countries around the world. And the research that goes on there feeds into things like the IPCC reports. So Met Office scientists have been in, I think, pretty much every single IPCC report that's happened. And actually, the most recent call for authors, we've had a number of researchers in the Hadley Centre who are going to be like lead authors on some of the sections in the report, which is really cool. And I touched on this a second ago, but the Hadley Centre Climate Programme, or the HCCP, also, if I start going into loads of acronyms, I apologise. I know that every workplace has them, but civil service is really, really bad. We literally make everything into an acronym. So Hadley Centre Climate Programme, the HCCP, this doesn't encompass all of the climate science that happens at the Met Office, but it is the vast majority of it. So the HCCP receives around £20 million of funding from the UK government every year. So we get quite a lot of money to do climate science research. And the most recent iteration of the programme, so from April last year until March 2027, it was the first time that the programme was developed in sort of complete collaboration between Met Office scientists and then key colleagues in the UK government. And in particular, there are three government departments that we primarily interact with here. So they're all acronyms, but I'll say what they mean. So DESNZ is the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. For anyone who's familiar with UK politics at the moment, this is Ed Miliband's department. Ed Miliband is a government minister who is really, really big on climate change and environmental issues. So we kind of love him. We've got DEFRA, which is the Department for Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, which is a bit of a Goliath in the civil service world. It's the largest government department that we have. And then we've got FCDO, which is the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So in the HCCP, we work really, really closely with these three government departments. So the programme is refreshed every 3 years, as I've kind of touched on a little bit there. And it's almost entirely focused on pure climate science research. So very little service delivery actually happens through the HCCP. It's primarily about working with international partners to sort of produce the latest climate science and raising the profile of UK climate science on the international stage through science diplomacy. And I'll talk a little bit, I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how the HCCP is structured. So this is an infographic which shows in the top, so the green box at the top, they show the kind of primary aims of the HCCP and what it's been able to achieve since it first came into being back in 1990, and how these achievements and aims are being met by 6 different work packages. So the middle 4 boxes there, so work packages 1 to 4 are the kind of primary science work packages, the primary research work packages that are happening in the HCCP at the moment. And then these 2 at the bottom, so work package 5, And then work package 6 are these underpinning work packages, which kind of dip into all of the above 4. And the bottom right-hand corner there, so data and pathways to exploitation, you can see knowledge integration. And so I'll touch on the other ones just a little bit, but then when we get to work package 6 and knowledge integration, that's where I'll direct most of my focus, because I hope that's what most people here will be interested in hearing about. So work package 1, that is aiming to provide science to enable society to navigate a safer, risk-aware, climate-resilient pathway to climate stabilisation. So this includes research on things like what the risks are of overshooting 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, so the temperature thresholds agreed at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015. Things like what the potential for land-based climate mitigation is, so through things like afforestation, natural regeneration, and then how will the Earth system respond to overshooting things like 1.5 and 2 degrees. So if we overshoot these temperature thresholds, then bring temperatures back down through things like negative emissions, how will the Earth system respond to that? What will it look like after that's happened? Work package 2, that's about monitoring and attribution of present and past climate. So this graphic here, this screenshot here is just an example of one of the pieces of work that's associated with this. So the Met Office has a climate dashboard, which provides metrics on a variety of different indicators of global warming. So things like changes to global surface temperature, sea ice extent, changes to extreme precipitation, stuff like that. So this includes data produced by both the Met Office Hadley Centre and the climate modelling that goes on in the Hadley Centre, but it'll also take data from other international partners. So you can see on these graphs, we've got data from places like NOAA, we've got places for data from Barclay, ERA5, which I think is the European, so all sorts of different climate research centres. The work package is also looking at improving monitoring of UK greenhouse gas emissions, attribution of climate change to extreme events, and that also is touched on by some of the other work packages as well. Work package 3, so that is about seasonal to decadal forecasting, with a big focus actually on annual to decadal forecasting. I know that's quite a big focus of some of the research here at BSc as well. And this can be used to inform things like UK energy security. So for example, one of the big areas of interest at the moment is how, with climate change, we might see wind droughts in the North Sea and what implications this could have for renewable power generation using wind power, because at the moment, increasingly so, a huge amount of the UK's electricity is coming from wind power and offshore wind turbines in the North Sea. And then also international climate predictions from this forecasting. Also improvements in near-term climate prediction, and then early warning systems for extreme events. So this could be, for example, extreme events associated with climate tipping points or high impact low likelihood events. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. Touch on it now. So work package 4 is looking at compound hazards. So that includes things like hill events, tipping points, both happening now and in potentially the next 30 or 50 years' time under a warming climate. So that can be doing things such as producing new data sets to help provide early warning. And one example I've got here down at the bottom is the 2023 marine heat wave that was brought about by what was then the warmest June on record. That was beaten by this year's June, so that's slightly out of date. In fact, this summer was the warmest summer on record in the UK. It was actually really nice and sunny. Good for us, but bad for climate change. And then the most interesting from our point of view are work packages 5 and 6. So work package 5, not so much. That's all about the actual sort of modelling infrastructure. So all about the Met Office supercomputer, and in particular the new supercomputer, which, so I know Mare Nostrum came online fairly recently. So we've got our own new supercomputer, which has been delayed and delayed and delayed. But I think end of this year, start of next year, it's going to be fully operational. So yeah, all the software engineers are really, really excited about that. People like me, doesn't make much of a difference, but and then work package 6. So that is all activities that take place within the HCCP at the science policy interface, and in particular, knowledge integration. So knowledge integration at the Met Office, what is its mission? So what we want to do is we want to maximize the relevance, reach and impact of climate science in order to support positive and meaningful change. And that is largely through informing policymaking. So you can see here this little graphic. On one side, we've got scientists, so predominantly Met Office climate scientists, but also scientists at other research institutions in the UK and internationally. On the other side, we've got UK government. So this can be cross-governmental, so all UK government departments, but it is primarily those 3 that I talked about a second ago. So DESNZ, DEFRA, and FCDO. And in the middle of these 2 sits the knowledge integration team. And you can notice the arrows here, we've got them going in both directions, and that emphasizes how it's not just a one-way push of knowledge and information. We're not just getting all of the latest climate science and then telling UK government about it. Instead, it's a 2-way feedback process. There's a lot of interaction, iteration that goes on there. So we also get UK government saying, okay, great, this is really interesting stuff. Here's exactly what we want to know, and this is how we want you to be explaining it to us. This is the sort of outputs we want to see from you. So I'll talk now a little bit more about how we go about doing this. This shows roughly how the work that we do in the knowledge integration team is apportioned. So it's broadly split into 2 areas. So we've got, on the one side, we have stuff that's directly related to and funded by the Hadley Centre Climate Programme. So around 80% of the funding from the knowledge integration or KI team comes from the programme. So that's where most of our work is going to take place. But then, as some of you are aware, we also dabble in external projects as well. So things that are not directly related to or funded by the UK government. So things like Aspect, which I know BSc is heavily involved with. We then have others like ExAIDA. I forget what the acronym means, but it's something to do with extreme events. We've got WCSSP, so that's Weather and Climate Science Services Partnerships. DEFRA DESNZ Land Climate Programme, which misleadingly is funded by DEFRA and DESNZ, but isn't actually being led by them. It's being led by other research institutions. And then things like UK National Climate Science Partnership. But I'm going to speak mostly about what's going on here. So work funded by the HCCP. So I'll have a slide or 2 on each of these, and I'll just touch quite briefly on the external projects at the end. So co-developed outputs. So I guess an output is just kind of any piece of work, really. It could be a briefing, it could be an infographic, it could be delivering a seminar or a workshop to people in government. So what I'll do now is I'll give an example of a briefing and how that might be developed in collaboration with our partners in the government. So we get a request from government saying, for example, we need a briefing on how climate change is going to affect the world's forests. So this is something that I'm doing at the moment. They tell us exactly what sort of information they want included in the briefing, how they might like it to be best presented. And then what we do in KI is we think, great, we know we've got scientists at the Met Office who work on this stuff already and are experts in the field. We also have a decent idea of the literature landscape, so we can go and do some digging ourselves into what the latest science is. So we'll go and do our own research, and then while we're doing that, we'll go and talk to Met Office scientists about what they think should be included in this briefing and what the most important and up-to-date science is. So while we're doing that, we'll be in constant contact with colleagues in government as well, and we'll be checking to make sure that the information that we're including is what they're after, that the structure of the document is okay, that the language is accessible, that we're producing infographics that mean that people can look at the information and be like, okay, this is a great summary, and we can pull out all the information we need as easily as possible. So there's a kind of continuous feedback loop that we will be going on here. So the document that is being worked on at the moment is going through several iterations, and that's because we're constantly talking to both Met Office scientists and colleagues in government to make sure that the information is being presented in a really useful, impactful, accessible way. So once this has happened, which I guess it's going to have been 2 to 3 months since it actually started, so hopefully next month we'll be delivering this briefing note to government, so in early October, after it's been reviewed by both our sort of key stakeholders in government, then also scientists, and then quality assurance has taken place. So that's kind of an introduction as to how we go about working with government on some of the things that we do. The second point on that diagram is, so this is really important in helping us to carry out this work with government and fostering a really, really close relationship with these departments. So what we have in the knowledge integration team is we have 3 secondees. So we have 1 seconded into each of these departments here. And the approach that we have differs from that of a typical secondee. So typically, say if you have your partner organization that you work with, you get seconded to a secondary organization for maybe 6 months or a year. While you're at that secondary organization, you will normally have very little contact with your partner, with your sort of home organization, as it were. You might hear from them every now and then, but generally speaking, you work entirely in that secondary organization. This isn't what happens with the 3 secondees that we have in knowledge integration. So they work 50% of their time in KI, and then 50% of their time they will work with colleagues directly in these government departments. So they'll spend kind of, depending on where they live and how easy it is to get to London, they'll spend about half of their time in Exeter, and then they'll often go for 2 or 3 days every fortnight to London as well to work directly with their teams. So what we found is that this is the most effective way in which knowledge integration can act as a bridge between Met Office and also climate science more generally, and the asks of our primary stakeholders in government. So this means that the secondees are able to really effectively support the government's department that they've been seconded into. So they understand exactly what their wants and needs are when it comes to climate science, but at the same time, they can flag to their contacts and stakeholders in these departments exactly what the latest science is and what they also think they might be interested in knowing more about. So because of this 2-way exchange of information and this really close relationship, it means that we can maximize the value, impact, and reach of the science that's going on. Yeah, so their salaries come entirely from the Met Office, but they spend a really big chunk of their time also like with their government department. So they'll often go take the train to London and spend 2 or 3 days in London at a time, actually sitting within their department. So they'll each have, so for example, so we've got the 3 secondees, and so the KI technically has, the Met Office has 3 managers, but one of these managers, Rosie, she is in charge of managing the 3 secondees. So as well as the 3 secondees, she'll have a really close relationship with these departments. And then each of the secondees will have a primary contact, kind of a manager, who they report to primarily in their associated department. If that makes sense. That's okay. Grand. So as well as the secondees, we've got 2 ways in which we're able to speak to government and hear their views more widely. So going beyond those three key government departments. So the first way is through the government user group. The second way is through science seminars. I'll come on to that in a second. But the government user group is just like we see with the secondees. We have this two-way exchange of information. So user group meets on a sort of semi-regular basis. I think at the moment it's about 20 to 30 people strong. And it's by invite only. And it's a way for which the knowledge integration team and also Met Office climate scientists as a whole can kind of showcase the science that's going on. And then members of user group can ask questions to knowledge integration and to Met Office scientists to inform the sort of work that we're doing. So there's a chance for us to get input on the materials that we're producing. So not just from FCDO, DEFRA, DESNES, but also government more widely, if it could have wider application. And then, yeah, as with the secondees, it's a chance for us to highlight the latest Met Office and also climate science more generally. So this screenshot here is just an example of some feedback that was gathered at the user group that happened earlier this month. And that was on how the State of UK Climate Report for this year, how some of the outputs that we produced for that, so the report itself and associated infographic, how members of user group were finding it in terms of sort of using it for, providing lines to ministers in terms of its general usability and impact. And then the other way in which we can reach government more widely is through science seminars. So unlike with the secondees and with the user group, this is more a one-way push information. So there's not so much collaboration that goes on here. It's more about knowledge integration and Met Office scientists telling people across government about the latest science. There is an opportunity for people from science to ask questions, but it's more of this one-way push. It's open to all government employees, though, so you don't have to be invited to come along to these science seminars. You can just pop up if there's a topic that you think is interesting. I think they happen every month. So the one that's going to be happening next month is on the State of Global Wildfires report. So that's going to be released on the 9th of October. And that's been produced in collaboration with Met Office scientists, but also research institutions around the world. It's being led by UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which is based just outside of Oxford. And then I think this is the last point on the sort of work that we do that's funded through the Hadley Centre Climate Programme. So this is ad hoc questions, so short turnaround questions that we will get from people in government. So in knowledge integration, we have a certain amount of time and resource that has been set aside for us to respond to requests from, usually coming from either one of these three government departments on really short timescales. So unlike with a lot of the other work we do through the HCCP, which is agreed for kind of an entire financial year, this stuff is often turned around very, very quickly, even within a day. So this gives the work that we do more flexibility. So just to give an example, the top one here, so providing information for lines to government ministers. So back in it was a Tuesday morning, end of June, start of July, we had a request that came in from Ed Miliband and his department to provide some advice on the UK heat waves. So there have been 2 heat waves that hit the UK in June, and they wanted to know more about how these were situated in the climate change context. So my manager and I, this request came in at about 9:30 on Tuesday morning, and we were able to pull together information with help from scientists and the Met Office press team. And I think by 2 o'clock, we delivered these lines to ministers because they wanted to have them handy in case they needed to talk about them in Parliament. So that was quite cool. That was quite fun. So very short timescales, typically within a day or within a week. And then just to touch very briefly on some of the external projects that we get involved into. So I'm less involved in most of this work. most of the stuff I do in knowledge integration sits within HCCP funded stuff. But yeah, this is just where we work with institutions primarily outside of the UK government to undertake research and support national and international policy making, things like that. So the one here that I do dabble in is the DEFRA DESNZ Land Climate Programme, which is funded by, or partly funded by UK government, but is being led by another research institution in the UK. And that's in knowledge integration. We just have a little bit of a say in how the key findings from this programme are going to be communicated, both to government and then more widely to sort of bodies like sort of NGOs, the National Farmers Union, stuff like that. Okay, I've got a couple of case studies here just to give a bit more of a flavour about the sort of work that we do through the HCCP. So the first example is one that was a few years old, so it's something that's already been completed. And then I've got another example of a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment and that I'm directly involved in. So yeah, I'll just talk a bit about like what the request was, what we did, and then what the result was, like what outputs were produced. So the first case study is looking at something called the climate impact maps. So back in 2022, government came to us at the Met Office and to knowledge integration in particular, and said that they were interested in learning more about how some key climatic hazards globally might have international impacts. So, for example, how extreme heat and how extreme precipitation has impacted communities around the world, both recently and what future impacts might be under different levels of climate warming. And specifically, that's looking at a 2-degree and a 4-degree temperature increase by the end of this century. So they wanted us to communicate this information in a way that they could properly understand how different communities in different countries worldwide could be affected by how these different hazards would evolve under a changing climate. So, as I've spoken about before, this was a two-way feedback process. So when the request came in, so it wasn't me who did this, it was someone who, she still works in the Met Office, but she's not in the knowledge integration team anymore. So what she did was she worked really closely with Met Office scientists, colleagues in the 3 key government departments. I think the request mostly came from DESNZ, or what it used to be called, BEIS, it's another acronym, and DEFRA, of around 4 months back in 2022 to develop these climate impact maps. So yeah, she spoke to Met Office scientists to find out exactly what the latest science was, and spoke to government about how they wanted this information to be presented. So straight away they said they wanted this in the form of really accessible infographics with just key information highlighted. They didn't want a sort of comprehensive briefing document. They wanted it to be short and snappy. And then once she had all this information to hand, she spoke to the design team that we have at the Met Office so that they could draw up versions of these impact maps, so to provide the key information that was needed. And then this went through several iterations until they got to a final finished product. So in 2022, the summary sort of infographics that looked at the observed climate impacts were produced. And the following year in 2023, impact maps looking at projected climate impacts were produced. So this is what one looks like. So that is one for recent climate impacts, or what was then recent climate impacts of extreme high temperatures. So you can see it gives examples from 2022 primarily. And then, yeah, the future impact maps came out a year later. So these received some really, really good feedback from government colleagues. They were able to use these very easily as briefing materials. We also had them presented by some of our sort of big name Met Office scientists at UN events, including at COP that year. And then as a sort of further way to push them and to sort of big them up, they were Met Office press releases to showcase them. And the second case study I'll refer to is something that, I've been involved with recently, or recently got involved with, which is documents that, it's a bit of a mouthful, but they're around the contextualised advice for extreme UK weather. So a couple of years ago, government came to us and said that they wanted some comprehensive documents that gave information about how certain extreme types of extreme weather in the UK are situated in a climate change context. So specifically, they wanted to know about heat waves and extreme high temperatures, thunderstorms and convective rainfall, changes to wind, so either extremely high winds or wind droughts. I think I mentioned earlier that how that could have implications for UK energy security, rain and so rainfall droughts, and then cold spells. So the reason why they wanted this information is they wanted to have documents to hand which would help to improve their understanding, and this could then be used to help inform policy making, and then could also be used for things like providing lines to ministers, as I mentioned earlier with that request that we turned around for DESNZ earlier this summer. So over a period of about a year, a colleague of mine in knowledge integration, Alice Drain, she worked closely with the Met Office scientists, government, and then people in the press office at the Met Office to produce these 5 really comprehensive documents about how these extreme weather hazards sit in a climate change context. So they're about 15 pages long, so they're quite lengthy. They also include quite a lot of technical language that maybe isn't that accessible to a lay audience, because we envisaged that they would primarily be used by people in government who were already fairly clued up when it comes to climate science. And so they include detail on things like the sections they include. They've got headline messages, so the key information from the document, information on past weather events, what observed changes have been recently and what future projections might be under different levels of climate warming, and then things like climate attribution, as well as finishing off with a frequently asked questions section. I should also mention that these haven't just been produced and then left as they are. They're being updated on an annual basis. So Alice has moved on to work on something else, which is why I've come in to pick up this work. So I'm sort of now involved in the annual refresh of these documents, which thus far has been pretty easy to do. So some of the outcomes of this is that the documents have been really well received. They've been used by many stakeholders in government. They've also had some slightly less foreseen impact. So because some of the weather forecasters for some of the UK's media organisations actually have their own spaces at the Met Office, and they want to start situating extreme UK weather in a climate change context, they've started to use these documents as well. So we've had people from the BBC, Channel 4, weather, etc., coming to us using these documents and saying how useful they've been. And then they've also been used by the Met Office press team in some of their press releases and their announcements. And actually this year they won an award. So that's a photo of some of the scientists. There are many of them who were involved in producing documents themselves. So that was an award at the Royal Met Society's annual event. That was back in June, July time, I think. And then the next steps for these documents. So I mentioned that I've come in to pick up this work, and also saying how in their current form they're really comprehensive, which is great for providing lots of information, but it means that they're quite heavy, and for people in government who maybe don't have a climate science or even a physical science background, they can be quite difficult to interpret. So at the moment, we're speaking to some of our key colleagues in DESNZ and DEFRA to work out how these documents can be made a bit more useful for a sort of wider government audience. So it's in its fairly early stages at the moment, but we are sort of coming up with some early concepts of what these new documents could look like, and they'll ideally sit alongside the ones that already exist. So sort of like potentially sort of 2-page summary explainer documents, which might look a little bit like this, with lots of sort of like infographics, lots of images, and to make them a little bit more accessible to people more widely in government. And then, last of all, I should say, by the way, that the reason why I included that picture is because that's the picture I have for my Met Office profile. It's about the only half decent one I have. So why am I here? So I've been chatting to some of you already. It's been lovely to meet you. So primarily for sort of knowledge exchange, capacity building, collaboration, all that sort of stuff between KIT here at BSc and then the KI team at the Met Office. So I've been learning a bit more about the work that goes on here. And then also I've been imparting some of my knowledge about what we do at the Met Office. I know I had a long chat with Garrett yesterday about some of the work that he's doing. So hopefully some of the stuff I told him wasn't completely useless. So at the moment, you've probably seen me sitting at Dragana's desk this week, so you know where to find me. Don't know where I'll be sitting next week, but hopefully I'll still be on that floor. And yeah, I'm around until next Friday, so 26th September. And then, so yeah, if you want to come and say hi at any point, just come tap me on the shoulder because I'll probably be free. But if you can't think of anything to say and something pops into your head after I've left, that's my email address there. So just ping me an email, and yeah, I'll love to hear from you. I think that's everything. And